I took care of my disabled brother for 12 years while my sister lived abroad and sent nothing. When our mother died, she left everything to my sister because she suffered being away from family. I sat in the lawyer's office and didn't blink. Here's how it happened. Liam is my younger brother, 2 years between us, sharp mind, good humor, hasn't walked since he was 19 because Priya, our older sister, was texting while driving and ran a red light on Greenfield Avenue. The SUV hit the passenger side and the impact went through the door into Liam's spine and took his legs in the time it takes to look up from a phone screen. Priya walked away with a scratch. There was an insurance settlement, $175,000, and our mother Grace told me it all went to medical bills. 13 years later, I found a wire transfer in the records, $60,000 sent to Priya's Barcelona bank account within the first year. She collected money from the accident she caused before I ever learned how to lift my brother out of bed. 2 years after the accident, Priya moved to Barcelona. Promised to send money every month. First month, $500. Second month, $300. And after that, nothing for 12 straight years except one Christmas card with 50 euros inside. That was year 3. Liam opened it at the kitchen table, and the money fell on the floor, and he stared at it and said, "Is this per year or per leg?" And I laughed because if I didn't laugh, I was going to break something. That was the last financial contact Priya made with our family until the will reading. I moved into Grace's house and became Liam's full-time caregiver at 22. I didn't know how to lift a grown man, manage medication schedules, fight insurance companies, or install a shower chair at midnight because hiring someone cost money I was spending on prescriptions. I learned all of it the way you learn things you have no choice about, badly first, then with a precision that becomes invisible because nobody's watching. Marcus, his physical therapist, taught me the transfers, how to brace and grip and protect my back so I could still do this in year 10 the way I was doing it in year 1. Marcus had a 3-year-old daughter whose crayon drawings he kept taped to his equipment bag, and he'd show them to Liam between reps, and Liam would study them and say, "That horse has too many legs. Marcus, you should talk to her about that." Those small moments between the exercises were some of the only sounds in the house that didn't come from a medical device. The first week, I started a notebook for Liam, not a financial document, a journal so he could read about good days during bad ones. First entry. Today we watched the game. You laughed at the ref. I made soup and you said it needs more salt, which is what you say about everything. Over time, as money got tighter, I started adding expenses alongside the entries. $47.50 medications March, $120 wheelchair repair, $85 shower modification. I did half the labor on myself. The journal became a ledger because my life didn't have room to keep love letters and receipts in separate places. Grace saw me writing in it one evening and said something I carried for the next decade. "What are you doing, keeping score? A real son doesn't keep receipts." She walked away. I almost closed the notebook forever. I didn't. And that line became the foundation of the legal case that dismantled her will. Before everything went bad, Priya was capable of being a real sister. The day before she left for Barcelona, she took Liam to Riverside Park, bought him ice cream, sat with him for 3 hours talking about nothing. I found the photo in his nightstand 13 years later, both of them smiling in the sunlight, and I held it because I needed to believe that version of her existed somewhere inside the woman who spent 3 years teaching our mother to be afraid of me. And Grace helped in the beginning, labeled envelopes on the counter every Monday, groceries, medications, gas, exact cash inside, her neat handwriting on the front. Same handwriting that later signed the will leaving me nothing. When I graduated engineering school, while caregiving full-time, Priya sent a watch from Barcelona with a note, "You're the strongest person I know." The same sister who wrote that later typed, "He's only staying for the house, Mom," into a Sunday evening text. 12 years. I woke at 5 a.m. every day, lifted Liam, medications by 5:30, breakfast by 6:15, therapy exercises, showered him, dressed him, fought insurance that denied wheelchair cushion replacements twice, and worked contract engineering from the kitchen table between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. I did not take a vacation. I did not go on a date. I slept on his floor for the first 2 years because his night terrors only stopped when he could hear me breathing. At work, I managed structural calculations for commercial buildings, and my supervisor said I had the kind of brain that keeps buildings standing. Then I drive home and help Liam eat because his hands were shaking, and I pretend not to notice because his dignity mattered more than speed. The distance between who I was in an office and who I was in that kitchen is something I've never been able to name. For times I asked Grace to bring Priya home, even for a weekend. For times, she's struggling over there. She can't just drop everything. Third time I raised my voice. Grace said, "Don't shout. You're scaring Liam." Liam was in the other room with the television on. The conversation was over because Grace decided it was over. The fourth time I didn't ask. I sat in the kitchen and thought about driving away and never coming back. Then Liam's monitor beeped because he couldn't turn over, and I went upstairs. Year 6. Putting Liam to bed, adjusting his pillow. He looked at me and said, "Does Priya even know I'm alive?" I said, "Of course she does." He said, "When was the last time she called me, not mom, me?" And the answer was never, not once in 12 years. He said, "I think she forgot about me, and I think that's easier for her." I turned off his light and went to the bathroom and sat on the bathtub edge and counted the faucet drips because counting something small was easier than holding something that large. There's a specific way a house changes when the power in it shifts. In the first years, the whole space felt like a home that happened to have medical equipment in it. Grace in the kitchen, Liam in the living room, me everywhere else. By year 7, Liam's hospital bed took up half the living room. The dining table had become my engineering desk because I couldn't afford a separate workspace, and the hallway closet was full of medications and wheelchair parts instead of coats. The house had become a care facility that happened to have a family in it, and I was the only staff member who didn't get to clock out. Liam's birthday was in March, and every year I try to make it feel real, not a medical appointment with cake. Year 9 was the one I remember most clearly because Grace was having a good week, and I thought maybe things were stabilizing. I bought a cake from the bakery on Elm Street, the one with the blue frosting Liam liked because he said it tasted like the ocean even though it tasted like sugar and food coloring, and I set up the kitchen table and called Priya to ask if she wanted to video call for 5 minutes so Liam could see her face. She didn't answer. I called again an hour later and she texted back, "In a meeting, send him my love." I showed Liam the text, and he read it and handed the phone back and blew out his candles and didn't make a wish. Or if he did, he didn't tell me, and the empty chair across from us did all the talking neither of us wanted to do. Some days were worse than others in ways I couldn't predict. There'd be stretches where Liam's body cooperated, and we'd watch 3 episodes of something and argue about whether the main character was an idiot, which he usually was, and those days felt close to normal. Then there'd be weeks where the pain was bad and the medications weren't landing and Liam would go quiet in a way that scared me more than the screaming. Because screaming meant he was fighting and quiet meant he might be done. And on those weeks I slept on his floor again because I couldn't stand the idea of him being in pain in a dark room with nobody close enough to hear. I kept logging every day. The notebooks got thicker. I moved through the first one and started a second and a third. And by year 10, I had 4 spiral-bound notebooks on a kitchen shelf full of soup recipes and medication costs and observations about my brother's life that nobody except me would ever read, or so I thought, until a lawyer opened them 12 years later and told me they were worth almost $1 million. Year 8. Priya called Grace on a Sunday, and I overheard Grace's side through the wall. Grace said, "Of course Nathan's not taking advantage. Don't be ridiculous." That was the first time I heard the accusation out loud, standing in the hallway holding a laundry basket with Liam's sheets, the ones I changed twice a week for 8 years, hearing my mother defend me against something I didn't know I'd been accused of. Grace hung up and looked tired, and I asked what that was about, and she said, "Nothing. Your sister worries." I let it go. That was the mistake I'll carry for the rest of my life. Grace's health started declining 3 years before she died, cognitive issues and confusion, and I became caregiver for both of them, Liam in the morning and Grace in the afternoon, and engineering at midnight, and whatever passed for sleep somewhere in between. That's when Priya's campaign went from Sunday afternoon probing to something systematic and deliberate. Every Sunday at 6 p.m., Priya called. 156 calls over 3 years, and after Grace died, I went through her phone and found that every single call followed the same architecture. 20 minutes of Priya crying about how lonely she was and how much she missed the family. 10 minutes of concerned questions about me that were really surveillance. Does he let you go out? Does he control the money? Does he ever take you anywhere nice? and 5 final minutes of poison delivered so gently you'd miss it if you weren't listening for it. Are you sure he's doing this for the right reasons, Mom? I've read about these situations, sons who stay too long. It's more common than you think, and I just couldn't live with myself if something happened to you. My mother was being dismantled on a weekly schedule, 52 times a year, while I was in the next room lifting her other child into a shower chair and counting the hot water minutes because the boiler was old and I couldn't afford to replace it. Priya sent emails too, 12 articles over 18 months about caregiver abuse and financial exploitation, never a direct accusation, just a link with one line. Just be careful. Mom, I read this and thought of your situation. Grace read every article. Her browser history showed every click, and she searched signs your child is taking advantage of you 3 times in the last year of her life. Sitting at the desktop computer next to the window, where I'd hung a bird feeder so she'd have something peaceful to watch, typing those words about the son who hung it. She started locking her bedroom door at night, and I heard the click once and thought it was confusion from the cognitive decline, but it wasn't confusion, it was fear. Fear that Priya planted one forwarded article at a time until the son who checked on her every single night became the person she locked herself against. Once a year, Priya flew in for exactly 5 days and took Grace to restaurants and spa days that cost more than Liam's monthly medication, things I could never afford because I was choosing between wheelchair maintenance and my own groceries. And Priya would bring Grace back quieter each time, more pulled inward, and I'd ask what was wrong, and she'd say she was tired from the walking. But she wasn't tired from walking. She was tired from processing her daughter saying, "Nathan doesn't take you anywhere, does he?" Over wine in a restaurant while her son was home heating soup for her other child and writing another entry in a notebook she once told him a real son wouldn't keep. And Priya was paying Grace directly, something I discovered during legal discovery, a hidden account with $47,000 in deposits over 3 years, not for Liam's care, for Grace personally. A retainer keeping her financially comfortable and emotionally dependent so the weekly poison would stick, because a mother who depends on her daughter's deposits is a mother who believes her daughter's version of the truth. Grace never told me about the account because Priya told her, "Nathan will just take it for himself," which is exactly the kind of sentence that works on someone who's been reading articles about financial exploitation by caregivers for 18 months. I need you to understand what was happening in that house during those final 3 years. Because from the outside it looked like a son taking care of his family, and from the inside it was a demolition job on every relationship I had with my own mother, directed from 1,200 miles away by a woman who never once called the brother she put in a wheelchair. And I didn't even know there was a war being fought until I found the battlefield on a dead woman's phone. Grace died on a Thursday morning in November while I was next to her. She took a breath that was different from the one before it, and then she didn't take another one. Priya flew in 2 days later wearing a linen dress from Madrid and gave a eulogy about how distance is its own kind of suffering. I stood at the back holding Liam's wheelchair and didn't trust what would come out of my mouth if I opened it. 2 weeks later, Donald's office. While reading. Donald had been our family lawyer for 15 years, and he sat behind his desk looking like a man asked to deliver something he fundamentally disagreed with. He read the will. Everything to Priya. House, savings, $200,000 life insurance, jewelry. Reason, she suffered being away. I looked at Donald and Donald looked at me and his face was doing something professional obligations wouldn't let his mouth do. I said, "Thank you, Donald." Wheeled Liam out, drove home, sat at the kitchen table. But I didn't sit there and grieve. Something had shifted between the parking lot and the front door, something that felt less like sadness and more like the specific calm you feel when you realize the fight isn't over, it's starting, and for the first time in 12 years you're not too exhausted to swing. I called Ava Chin that night, trust and estate attorney who'd published a paper on caregiver compensation that I'd found at 2 a.m. on my phone while Liam slept. She answered on the third ring and listened to me talk for 45 minutes without interrupting once. And when I was done, she said one sentence. "Nathan, bring me the notebook." Her office smelled like new carpet and had a framed photo of a golden retriever on the desk that she caught me staring at and said, "That's my paralegal, more reliable than most lawyers I know." She opened the ledger and went slow, entry by entry, the soup notes and the medication costs and the wheelchair repairs and the nights on the floor, day 1 to day 4,000. And when she closed it, she looked at me and said, 12 years of full-time caregiving at professional rates is roughly $980,000. Your documented out-of-pocket expenses add another $127,000. This notebook is not a journal, Nathan, it's an invoice, and it's the most detailed one I've ever seen in this practice. Now bring me your mother's phone and everything from her last 3 years, because I think the will is only the surface of what happened here. I went through Grace's phone that night sitting on her bed in the dark, the pillow still holding the faint shape of her head, the room still carrying the ghost of her lavender spray. I started from the oldest messages and scrolled forward through 3 years of Priya's texts, watching the language shift from "Hi Mom, miss you" to "Does Nathan control the finances?" to "He's only staying for the house. Mom, I've seen it before, please be careful." 156 Sunday follow-up messages that turned my mother against me while I was in the next room, keeping her alive. I found the forwarded articles in Grace's email, all 12 of them, and her browser history with the searches about sons who exploit their mothers, and I understood for the first time why she'd been locking her bedroom door. And I sat there on her bed holding the phone with the screen glowing in the dark and my jaw aching from grinding my teeth, without realizing I'd been doing it. Then I found the Bible. Old leather cover, pages soft from decades of handling, spine cracked in 3 places. Something slipped out when I picked it up and landed on the bedspread. A folded document on Donald's letterhead, dated 8 years ago. The original will. Everything to Nathan. Brother's care provisions, in careful detail. And stapled to the back, a handwritten note in Grace's steady handwriting from before the confusion. Nathan has earned this. He stayed when nobody else would. I read that note 4 times. She wrote this 8 years ago when her mind was clear and her handwriting was strong, and she knew exactly what I was doing and what it cost me. She knew. And then 156 phone calls and 12 forwarded articles and annual 5-day visits made her unknow it. And she died without the clarity she'd once had, and I was 20 feet away the whole time and never saw it happening. Donald confirmed it on the phone the next day, told me the original will was drafted in his office and he witnessed the signature, and the new will was not his work and he was never consulted about any change. Ava traced the new will to a different attorney that Priya found online and booked the appointment for, with Priya physically present in the room during both signing sessions, which is a procedural red flag for undue influence that any judge would recognize immediately. And Grace had called Donald's office 2 months before she died wanting to fix something with her will. The receptionist logged the call. Appointment scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m., but that weekend Priya was visiting for her annual 5 days and Grace had a fall that left her shaken and confused, and she never made Tuesday's appointment. And she died 6 weeks later without fixing the thing she knew needed fixing. Ava filed 2 things simultaneously. A caregiver compensation claim for $980,000 in unpaid labor, plus $127,000 in documented expenses, and a will contest based on undue influence during cognitive decline, supported by the original will, the manipulation evidence, the procedural violations, and 3 years of phone and email records. Legal discovery pulled Priya's financial records, and the suffering sister who couldn't afford to help turned out to have a $145,000 salary, an apartment she owned, $85,000 in savings, and 4 international vacations in the last year alone. The will said she suffered. The bank statements said she thrived. And the life insurance on Grace, $200,000, had its beneficiary changed to Priya 14 months ago, same window as the will change. Same manipulation period, same pattern. Ava looked at me across her desk and said, "They will settle, Nathan, because if this reaches a courtroom it will follow your sister for the rest of her professional life, and her lawyer is going to know that the moment he sees this file." Aunt Helen, Grace's sister, called after Priya was served. Helen had been quiet through everything, sitting in the back row at the funeral, saying nothing at the will reading, watching. But after Priya called her screaming, Helen said what she'd been holding for 12 years. "You don't get to cause the accident, leave the country, and collect the reward. That boy is in a wheelchair because of you, and his brother raised him while you were drinking wine on a terrace. Don't you dare call me looking for sympathy." Priya flew back and walked into the house without knocking, clicking through the hallway in expensive shoes like she still lived here, though every nail and every wall had been hammered by my hands, and every floorboard memorized by my feet over 12 years of 5 a.m. walks to Liam's room. I was at the kitchen table with the ledger open and a cold coffee next to it, because that's how all my coffee ends up, cold and unfinished, interrupted by something more important. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the notebook. She looked at the notebook and said, "What is that?" And I said, 12 years. She sat in Grace's old chair, the one from the envelope days, and put her purse on the table next to the ledger, and the two objects sitting side by side looked like a before and after photo of our family. She tried sweet first. "Nathan, we're family. Mom wanted this. You're letting a lawyer ruin everything we have left." The Sunday call voice. The one I'd heard through walls for 3 years without knowing what it was doing on the other side. I didn't respond. Picked up the cold coffee and took a sip because I needed something to do with my hands. She tried firm. "You lived here rent-free for 12 years. You had a roof, food, stability. That was your compensation, and frankly, it was generous." She tried threatening. "My lawyer says no judge gives $1 million for babysitting, Nathan, and that's exactly what this is going to look like in court." The word landed on the table between us like something dropped from height, and I said, "Say that word again." And she immediately started backtracking, saying she didn't mean it like that. "You called 12 years of lifting your brother, the brother you put in that wheelchair because you were texting and driving, 12 years of cleaning him and feeding him and sleeping on his floor and fighting his insurance company and giving up every part of my own life. You called it babysitting." The mask cracked. Not all at once, but like paint peeling when the surface underneath was never properly prepared. "You chose to stay, Nathan. Nobody forced you. Nobody asked you to be a martyr. Normal people put him in a facility and move on with their lives. But you stayed because you wanted the house, and you wanted Mom to feel guilty, and you wanted to play the hero. And now that your little plan didn't work, you want to be paid for it? Is that what this is? A shakedown." The refrigerator hummed. Liam's medication bottles stood in their row on the counter behind her. The kitchen light caught the pearls in her ears the same way it had at the funeral. "My little plan," I said, "was waking up at 5 a.m. for 4,381 days to keep your brother alive, while you posted sunset photos from a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. And yes, I documented every single day of it. Every meal, every medication, every dollar, every night on his floor. It's all in that notebook, and your lawyer is going to see every page." Then I picked up Grace's phone from the counter and unlocked it and started reading out loud. "March 14th, 2022. Does Nathan control the finances, Mom?" I scrolled. "April 8th. I worry about your situation. I've read about these cases." I scrolled. June 3rd. "He's only staying for the house, Mom. I've seen it before. Please be careful." With each message, Priya's face lost something. Not color exactly. More like structure. The way a building looks the same from outside until you realize the interior is collapsing floor by floor. She reached across the table for the phone, and I pulled it back. "There are 156 of these, along with 12 articles about caregiver abuse you emailed our mother, along with the original will you didn't know existed that says everything was mine, along with the phone log showing Mom tried to change the will back 2 months before she died and had a fall during your visit that weekend, and along with the $47,000 you deposited into a hidden account to keep her compliant. Your lawyer isn't going to hear some of this, Priya. She's going to hear all of it." She grabbed her purse and stood up, and she looked like what she actually was, someone who'd built a 3-year fraud on Sunday phone calls, and it was all coming apart at the same table where Grace used to leave envelopes labeled groceries. "You'll regret this," she said at the door. "When the lawyers take everything and you're sitting here alone with nothing, you'll wish you'd just signed. I've been sitting in this house alone with nothing for 12 years, Priya. You're just describing a Tuesday." She slammed the door hard enough to rattle every medication bottle on the counter, and one of them rolled to the edge and stopped, and I watched it settle. Mediation. 3 weeks later. 15th floor downtown. Conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows nobody looked through. Ava on my side with binders and a laptop. Priya and her lawyer Graves across the table. Graves adjusting his cufflinks every 30 seconds like a nervous habit he didn't know he had. Retired Judge Parker mediating with 30 years of family disputes behind her expression and reading glasses on a chain. Ava built the case the way I build structures. Foundation first, load-bearing evidence next, finishing touches last. The ledger, open to day 1. Turn to the last entry, 12 years of pages between. The original will with Grace's note. He stayed when nobody else would. The new will's procedural violations. The 156 Sunday calls and printed stacks. 12 forwarded articles in chronological order. Priya's financial records showing the $145,000 salary and the apartment and the savings and the vacations. The hidden $47,000 account. The insurance beneficiary change. And one page that Graves stared at longer than everything else combined. 12 rows. One per year. Column header, financial contribution by Priya to Liam's care. And next to every year, $0. 12 zeros on one page. And that single sheet of paper was the quietest thing on the table and the loudest thing in the room. Ava submitted Liam's written testimony next. 7 pages from a man who cannot walk, describing what the man who carried him did every day for 12 years. She read one paragraph aloud. The one about the 5 a.m. mornings and the floor sleeping, and Graves put his pen down and did not pick it back up. Then the audio. Liam's recordings. My brother couldn't walk to the door to stop what was happening, but he could press record on his phone, and for 2 years he'd captured 14 clips through the walls. Priya's voice turning from sweet to insistent, Grace getting quieter, Priya saying, Nathan is a grown man. Mom, he'll be fine. You need to think about this practically. Judge Parker listened to 3 clips and raised her hand. She took off her glasses. Counselor, she said to Graves, and the room was so quiet I could hear Priya breathing. In 30 years of doing this, I have never once seen a case where one sibling spent 12 years earning an inheritance and another spent 12 years talking her way into it. If this goes to court, and I need you to hear me clearly on this, it will not go well for your client. It will go memorably, publicly, and permanently badly. Graves leaned into Priya and whispered for what felt like a long time. Priya's hands were flat on the table, knuckles white, jaw working. Then something in her broke, not loudly but visibly, the way a load-bearing wall fails when the weight finally exceeds what it was built to hold, and she put her forehead on the table and her shoulders started shaking. And this wasn't the Sunday call crying. This wasn't the funeral performance. This was the sound of someone realizing that every lie she told for 3 years was now sitting in labeled stacks in front of a woman who'd been a judge for longer than Priya had been alive. Graves put his hand on Priya's back, looked at Judge Parker, and said, My client will discuss terms. I got the house, the one I'd lived in for 12 years, the one where I built the wheelchair ramp with pressure-treated lumber, I cut myself and installed the shower chair and replaced the porch railing and fixed the furnace at 2 a.m. on a January night, because calling a repair service cost $380 I was spending on Liam's prescriptions. I got $340,000 from the estate, which Ava calculated as a reduced caregiver compensation at roughly $2.30 per hour for 12 years of work that a professional agency would have charged $28 an hour for. And she made sure I understood I was accepting less than I was owed. And I said I understood, and she closed the folder. And a legally binding care trust for Liam funded from remaining estate assets, managed by an independent trustee, enough to cover professional support 3 days a week so I could return to full-time engineering for the first time in over a decade. Priya got nothing from the estate and owed $95,000 in legal fees to Graves, who sent her a final invoice before he'd even left the parking garage, and a court-ordered monthly care contribution of $2,000 for Liam for the next 10 years, enforceable and automatic and non-negotiable, 240 payments totaling $240,000. The sister who sent nothing for 12 years, the sister who sent one Christmas card with €50 in year 3 and nothing after, will now send $2,000 every single month for a decade whether she wants to or not. The life insurance was redirected to Liam's care trust after Ava's challenge showed the beneficiary change happened during the same manipulation window as everything else. Through Helen, I heard the rest over the following months. Priya sold the Barcelona apartment, the one with the terrace overlooking the sea that she posted sunset photos from while I was scrubbing medical equipment in the kitchen. She moved to a smaller place in a cheaper neighborhood outside the city center and took a second job doing freelance work on weekends. She stopped posting on social media entirely, and the last photo was from 5 months ago, a coffee cup on a windowsill with no caption and no terrace and no sunset. Helen says Priya doesn't talk about the family anymore, doesn't mention Grace, doesn't mention Liam, doesn't mention me. She transferred the first $2,000 care contribution on the first of the month, on time, and she'll do that 239 more times. Donald called me once after. One sentence. Your mother wrote that original will with a clear mind, and I'm sorry I didn't catch the other one sooner. Then he hung up. I found something in Liam's room weeks later while changing his sheets. A notebook under the mattress that wasn't mine. His own ledger, not expenses, a list of everything I'd done for him that he remembered. Thousands of entries in handwriting that took him 3 times longer because his hands don't work right. Nathan made the soup. Nathan carried me upstairs when the elevator broke. Nathan slept on the floor again. Last entry, dated the day after the settlement. Nathan got the house. He deserves more, but at least he got the house. I wish I could carry him somewhere for once. And one more thing. I went through Grace's Bible again after the case closed and found a folded paper behind where the original will had been, pressed flat against the binding. Grace's handwriting, shaky, final weeks. Nathan, I think I made a mistake. I can't remember what's true anymore. But I remember you carrying your brother up the stairs every night. Nobody else was there. I should have remembered that louder. I'm sorry. She couldn't undo the will. But she wrote that and hid it in the one book she knew I'd open. I opened the ledger one last time and wrote, Day 4381. Settled, and closed it and put it on the shelf. Last Tuesday morning, 5 a.m., I woke up and lifted Liam and made breakfast and poured 2 coffees and sat at the kitchen table in a house that is legally mine. Liam wheeled over and said it was supposed to rain, and I said okay, and we drank our coffee, and the house was quiet in the way houses are quiet when they belong to you and nobody can take them. That was the whole morning, and it was enough. Anyway, that's it. If you made it this far, appreciate you. Subscribe, leave a comment, whatever feels right. More coming.